the 16-piece frozen ravioli, boil them, and eat the entire thing. Those were the days. In any case.
You can do that now.
Yes, but I'll be fat now. So I actually have to care about that. As far as what an afterlife looks like, so the Jewish version of an afterlife, there's some debate on this. I've always been a little bit skeptical of people who claim to have a very solid read on the afterlife, since no one that, in our religion, no one that we know of has really come back and talked about it. So the basic idea of an afterlife that I've heard is basically bifurcated. There's the Talmudic idea, which is you sit around and you basically learn what God's structure was for the world, and you get to deconstruct everything that happened. Like there's different levels of heaven, and your scholarship determines where you were. And there's a lot of tales in the Talmud about people who are in heaven talking over, what, basically learning, sitting around and learning.
So it's like seminary.
Kind of.
Okay.
Kind of. And then there's the version of heaven that is a little bit more Kabbalistic in nature, which is that you are basically absorbed back into God. That God granted you divine spark. When you die, that divine spark is reunited with God. Whether you may retain your individual identity, but you are basically one with God at that point. And I find that a relatively compelling argument, considering that once your body is gone and your soul is still there, that I don't think that you just walk around in heaven. Heaven's basically just a nicer version of Earth. I don't think that. It's probably a difference in kind, not a difference in degree.
But either way, you're hoping there's cheese ravioli?
Well, there better be. I mean, otherwise was keeping kosher worth it? I mean.
Robert says, Ben, a new subscriber. Welcome, Robert. What are your thoughts on Jordan Peterson's theory of religion as expression of archetypes? Of
Jungian archetypes. I think that his book's Maps of Meaning is a really interesting book. It's a little tough to read. It's a very dense volume. Jung's notion of the collective unconscious and the commonality of humanity with regard to religion, I think there is some truth to the idea that you see certain narratives that crop up in virtually every religion. And there's some scientific basis to this, that the human brain seeks a deity, that the human brain seeks God. The notion that all religion is a reflection of Jungian archetype, it seems to me the only problem there is that it sort of equates the value of each religion, and I don't think that that's exactly right. As a religious person, I wouldn't be able to say that I think every religion is equally valuable or equally correct. Otherwise, I wouldn't be a Jew. I would just be a devotee of all religion, or a devotee of Jungian archetypes more generally. That may be. I hope I'm not oversimplifying Jordan's work. Obviously, it's very sophisticated. Work's like 500-page book, and the pages are all this big. And but the notion of religion acting out deeper impulses in the human psyche, I think that's true. I agree with him there.
And I think, too, you've also spent a lot of your career talking about the impact that religions have had on cultures.
Well, 100%. I mean, the fact is that, as I say, my new book, some of it's going to be on the impact of Judeo-Christianity and its value system on Western civilization. In fact, I made this argument to Sam Harris when we were sort of discussing / debating the other night. I think that podcast is coming out in a couple of weeks.
I heard it was pretty fun.
It was really interesting. So one of the key conversations was exactly this. I was saying to Sam, your entire worldview, your entire belief system is, it's atheist, both its atheism and its belief in a moral system are outgrowths of a Judeo-Christian foundation. And Sam didn't really want to grant the point, but it's, in my opinion, pretty obvious that that's the case, because obviously his hierarchy of values is very similar to my hierarchy of values, and we come at it from completely different religious points of view. So that means that there is a culture that has inculcated a lot of the religious values that I hold dear, and that impacted Sam as well.
Interesting. Yay for Eleanor. I like the E names here. She says, hey, Ben, my question is very open-ended. Why does God exist?
Well, I mean, asking why God exists suggests that he's sort of a creation of our imagination. And God exists because God exists. I mean, that's like saying, why a chair? And so, you could say that the chair was created for the purpose of you to sit on, but the whole point of God is that God wasn't created, God pre-existed. So saying why does God exist is sort of the question. If you want to make it more interesting, you would say, why, from a human perspective, must there be a God? And the answer to that is that without a God, it's very difficult to imagine the notions of choice, hierarchy of values, free will, why reason should matter, the notion of a morality that supersedes time and place. How do you get past the historicism of saying that every moral question is an outgrowth of the society of the era? You need a creator in order to make that happen. Also, this is another question that I was asking Sam pretty regularly, and he never really answered it, in my opinion. I don't know how, if you are an atheist, you get to a moral system, period. How do you get from an is to an ought? Right? Just like I say why God is like asking why a chair. The only way to answer why should there be a chair there is by saying, because there was a creator of that chair, and the creator of that chair intended for the chair to be sat upon, because this is why he created the chair this way. And this is, if you read Aristotle, this is basically Aristotle's defense of natural law, right? Natural law theory is all based on this notion, this ancient Greek notion that everything is created with a telos, that everything has a purpose. And the way that you can divine the purpose is by looking at the thing itself. So human beings have a purpose too, and that is to use our reason in the Greek idea. Well, if there's no creator, then, and it was all created by chance, then what purpose does a human being have other than we're just kind of walking around balls of meat that are defined by circumstance and genetics, and we have no will of our own, we have no capacity to reason. Even if we do have a capacity to reason is just a higher brain function, but why is it a superior brain function? No one can really explain that. So if you want to build a system, it's impossible to build a system without the notion of purpose, and a purpose cannot exist without the notion of a God.
TJ wants to know, hey Ben, you ever wonder why we're here?
Like in this room to make money, but beyond that,
I think he means on Earth, in this universe.
On Earth, I mean, I've always felt that we are here to fulfill certain godly duties, and those duties are both discernible through human reason to a certain extent, and also discoverable through revelation. Okay. So being a religious person solves a lot of these problems, but I think even if I were irreligious, I think that the purpose of being here would be to use right reason, as Aristotle would put it.
Okay. Chris says, hi Ben, I hear you mention your discussions about free will versus determinism with your wife. What is your stance on that? I personally believe in free will and could use some Hebrew hammer points.
So I'm a big advocate of the idea of as if, I'm trying to remember what the formal term is. Free will in which you could choose other than you have chosen. Okay. So you can choose differently than you did. So there's a bunch of different versions of free will. There's the compatibilist notion of free will, which is sort of the determinism and free will are both there. I don't think that that's really logical. There is the full-on Sam Harris version, which is the free will doesn't exist. You're a ball of meat wandering through the universe aimlessly, and you don't really have the capacity to choose for yourself. And there's free will maximalist, which is that your biology doesn't matter. And there's my position, which is your biology matters and constrains what you are capable of choosing. But in the end, you do have, to a certain extent, the capacity to choose. And that capacity to choose is what allows you to make your life better. And without that capacity to choose, all of morality breaks down, all of civilization breaks down. How can we determine what is... There is no concept of bad and good that does not rely on the notion of personal responsibility. Personal responsibility cannot exist in a world where you're not responsible for any of your actions. Basically, some firing in your neurons is responsible for all of your actions. So free will is not only a requirement for civilization, I think it is a truth, and I think that people like to call it an illusion. And I've asked this to people, including Sam, who are on the determinist side, which is, so why are we sitting here? Like, other than we were just, I guess, forced to be here by circumstance, I guess we might as well enjoy it. What exactly compels people to come out to a theater and watch? What compels people to think about ideas? Why is reason a thing? Reason is just another brain function, so why should we stump for reason? Are you capable of changing anyone? Why shouldn't you sit around all day? And when they say, and if they say, well, it's immoral to sit around all day, you say, well, what if your biology drives you to sit around all day? I think that the human brain, let's say, for example, the determinists are right. I think the human brain is incapable of comprehending its own demise, the demise of mind, and the demise of individuality and reason.
Okay. Jared is in Phoenix, I'm guessing, and he says, hey, Ben, I'm waiting for marriage before I have sex. How do I find a girl that does not only want to have... how do I find a girl that does not only want to have sex? I'm in college.
Okay, so first of all...
I think that end part is like really sad.
Right,
He's like, it's a no man's land. I'm in college.
Okay, so first of all, good for you, Jared. I have not found it to be the case that women in college are desperate for sex. I think this is a male fantasy that women are constantly desperate for sex all the time.
Or Seth Rogen, Zac Efron movies.
Right. I mean, if only it were so, says every man ever. Right. I mean, the idea that women are desperately looking for sex in the same way that guys are, I don't think is true. As far as finding a girl who's not looking to have sex before marriage, go to church. I mean, honestly, like go to a place where people agree with you ideologically and in terms of virtue. That's the best place to start. But I mean, these are questions that my wife and I legitimately asked each other on our first dates. I mean, I remember asking my wife if she was a virgin.
Oh, you mean you didn't? She didn't ask you the 10 questions from feminists that Amanda Prestigiacomo wrote about yesterday?
No, and she asked me whether I was a virgin. Like, these were important things to both of us, and because these were important, and it wasn't important because I hold some sort of outsized value with regard to virginity. The reason that it was important to me is because what this said is that sex was supposed to be inherently connected with a deeper relationship than a relationship of marriage, and that she took sex seriously, she took commitment seriously, and she took intimacy privacy seriously. Not because I think that, you know, once you have sex, you're sullied or something like that. I don't think that's right.
Okay, next we have a question from Tom. Hi, Ben. What is your opinion on the proposed idea that race and IQ are linked due to genetics rather than environment?
So the evidence on race and IQ is mixed with regard to how much these are linked to genetics as opposed to environment. So that's never really been clarified because you have actually seen IQ movement in groups. So when, for example, the IQ test started to be used at the beginning of the 20th century, Eastern European Jews tested very low on the IQ test, and then within a generation they're testing very high on the IQ test. A lot of it has to do with education. A lot of it has to do with how well you speak the language. And also it depends when you're taking the test. So IQ tests are quite variable. A lot of the time people take IQ tests when they're 3 or 4 years old, and those are not predictive. It's only when you get to 7 or 8 years old that IQ tests are actually predictive. And of course, it's necessary to point out that even if there was a group that had a lower IQ than another group, that does not speak to individuals within the group and where they fall in the IQ chart, because individuals are individuals, group metrics are group metrics. So it doesn't really say a lot for what policies should be, even if there were differentials in IQ among various groups, whether you're talking men or women or whether you're talking racial groups. So any group that you pick, there's going to be some IQ differential because the people in it are not identical, and the chances that it averages out exactly the same are, you know, relatively low. But that said, the attempt by some to basically say that discrepancy in America or in any other country are generally caused by IQ difference, as opposed to, for example, culture, I think that's a difficult road to hoe, just because IQ does not directly correlate with income beyond a certain point, for example.
Okay, interesting. Al wants to know, hey Ben, what's your response to leftists who say gender is disconnected from sex?
So one of the things that's really irritating about how leftists address gender and sex is that they like to redefine gender depending on the context in which they're using it. So they'll say that sex, the honest leftists will say there's sex, which is biological, you're a man or you're a woman or you're intersex. And then they will say that there's gender, and gender is a social construct, so that's feminine or masculine.
Yep.
Okay, well, feminine and masculine are connected to biology, right? Men tend to be more masculine, women tend to be more feminine. There is a biological connection there. But what the left will do is they'll say gender is completely disconnected from sex, it's completely arbitrary, it's a social construct, and then they'll read back into sex what they want gender to be. So they'll say that gender has nothing to do with man or woman, but there is such a thing as feminine and masculine. These are social constructs, and you can push those back into sex. And now biological sex no longer exists. A biological woman who identifies as a gendered man is actually a biological man, right? This is the way that the left likes to treat this, and it's insane. I mean, you can't conflate these terms. If you want to say that there are certain elements of societal constructs that are clearly socially constructed, like, for example, garment wear to a certain extent, then that's fair. But if you want to say that it's not biological, like feminine and masculine attributes are utterly disconnected from sex, biological sex, there's no scientific backing for that whatsoever.
Especially when it relates to hormones.
Oh, for sure. I mean, again, it's such a bizarre world where doctors are being misinformed about the sex of their patient because the patients are being asked gender. Like, this actually happens on a relatively frequent basis, where a doctor will enter a room. I know it's happened to my wife at least once, where a doctor enters a room and it says on the patient's chart that the sex is not what the sex of the person actually is. And the diagnosis is going to be very different. If you're having lower stomach cramps and you're a man, the diagnosis is very different than if you are having lower stomach cramps and you're a woman.
I'm just wondering, how long did we make it into the conversation before Ben mentioned his wife being a hot doctor?
Oh, that was like 10 minutes?
On your nice
New
movement,
record.
Your nice movement.
My MVMT watch right there. Oh, yeah.
Lance says, hey, Ben, love the show. Why is it that the left is so quick to give up on their individual rights for the sake of the supposed public good? Do you believe they are ignorant of where this will end?
I don't think they're ignorant of where it'll end, but I think that they blind themselves to where it ends. I think that the left does not believe in individual rights. They believe that you are defined by your group identity. So if you are a Jew, then it is your membership in the Jewish group that matters. If you're a black person, then it's your membership in the black group that matters, because power can't actually be promulgated except by group dynamics. This is sort of the Marxist theory, is that if you are an individual, there's no way you can make your way in the world. You can't really act out in powerful ways in the world. You have to band together with other people, and so we have to identify you by your group. That's the only way that things get done. And so the left is very focused on things getting done in terms of what they call social justice, right? Even the term social justice, evidence is that they care very little about individual rights, because social justice is all about what's good for the group, not what's good for the individual, or what's